discussed. There's lots about this agreement that's so weak. So, for example, one of the really bad things about the agreement is that they're banking on what's called carbon negative technologies. That means sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. How is this going to happen? This is totally untried, untested, and potentially very dangerous technology. It's what's technically called geoengineering, engineering the whole planet. It involves a kind of absurd idea that human beings can take control of our weather systems and our climate completely and manage that by putting mirrors in space and stuff like this. It's crazy stuff, really, Claire. And we need to have an agreement which would actually not rely on such unproven technologies, and that would be much more solidly based on what we in the Green Party say, which is reducing emissions and reducing waste. To be clear, an awful lot of this agreement amounts to simply countries sort of promising to do something. There's very little, I'm afraid, by way of actually legally binding enforcement mechanisms. So again, we need to go a lot further than this agreement if we're going to have a decent chance of bequeathing a safe planet and a safe climate to our children. And that's really what it's all about here. We're talking about giving our children and our grandchildren the right to expect that they're not going to live in a climate chaotic world, that they're not going to have, for example, the kind of floods that we saw in Norfolk here a couple of years ago every single year. I mean, that's the kind of potential future that awaits, and it really would be the height of responsibility if we don't rise to the challenge and put in the kinds of policies that are needed to stop that future from happening and to give us a better one. And this road, if it's built and Clive and his party support it, will produce a vast increase in the amount of emissions that we're producing locally here in the Norwich area. So really, you know, we have to be joined up about this, and that's what the Green Party is, joined up. If we're going to be serious about renewable energy, great. We've also got to be serious about reducing the amount of emissions. Why do they want to put vast amounts of taxpayers' money into subsidising nuclear? Why have they expanded enormously the subsidies on fracking? I mean, it's completely absurd. It's completely absurd. This is the ungreenest government ever. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The feed-in tariffs reduction is absolutely devastating for the solar industry. It's really bad news also for lots of people in Norwich and other places who have these solar panels on their roofs who, you know, in good faith thought, well, I'm going to go in for this and try to do the right thing. So it's really, really unacceptable. But again, I mean, we do have to be clear, Labour does have some responsibility here. They did much less than they could have done in some of these areas. One area which is especially concerning to us in the Greens and concerning to us here in Norfolk is fracking, and we don't know where Labour stand on fracking. It seems as though most people in Labour are actually quite willing to let fracking go ahead.
That's not true.
They could have had, let me just finish the point. They could have had a clear moratorium on fracking. They could have said no to fracking and cut the legs off this before it even got going. That's what we in the Green Party wanted. The government should step up here and play its full part. But of course, all of this work to have better coastal defences and river defences and so on is going to come to nothing unless we tackle the root causes of the problem. We have to tackle the root causes of the problem. We have to stop climate change at source. Otherwise, it's all going to be like King Canute. So that's why we in the Green Party say we have to look at what the source is, right? And the real source of the problem is economic growth. It's endless economic growth. And that's why, you know, when I hear Clive speak about this, I think it's great what he has to say about this issue, and his intentions are really good. But, you know, good intentions are not good enough. And sooner or later, you've got to see where the difference is between warm words and hot air. That's why we have to talk about economic growth, because as long as we keep on growing the economy, as long as we keep on pumping more and more CO2 into the atmosphere, as long as we have more and more industrial activity, we're never going to tackle the root causes of this problem. So we have to be honest about this. This is going to be a difficult issue to tackle because it involves changing the whole way we do our economy.
Maps around suggesting that maybe, you know, huge swathes of Norfolk and Cambridgeshire might be underwater by 2050. Is it too alarmist, Rupert, to be talking about these things?
Not at all. We need to make a clear distinction here, Claire, between being alarmist and raising the alarm. Churchill in the 30s said this. He said, people accuse Churchill of being an alarmist about the Nazi threat. He said, I'm not being an alarmist, I'm raising the alarm. And sometimes raising the alarm is exactly the right thing to do. So I work with the great climate scientists at University of East Anglia who are doing this work, who are telling us about the dangers that we face in the future. And what some of them are saying very clearly when they get to talk about this is, we have to rein in dangerous climate change, and that means that we have to rein in economic growth. Kevin Anderson of the Tyndall Centre says there is no path to taking climate change seriously and stopping it when you continue to go on growing the economy. And that's why it really worries me that Jeremy Corbyn, for all of his good intentions and for all of his green warm words, says we need faster economic growth.
So
he says we need faster economic growth. I mean, how does that add up?
This is an interesting point. I think one of the problems, I mean, look, let's be quite realistic here. The Green Party isn't going to form a government, has no hope of forming a government. You have to be able to convince an electorate, a sceptical electorate, often, that you have policies which can tackle climate change and at the same time keep their standard of living at a certain level that they've become accustomed to. You're not going to be able to win an election saying that you're going to go back to wearing sandals and wearing sackcloth. And I'm not saying you're saying that.
What we need to have is we need to have more Green MPs, and then we can start to move in the right direction. What I hope will happen at the next election is that we get a progressive alliance government elected, which would be Scots Nationalists, Welsh Nationalists, Labour and Greens. But let's be very clear about this. Unless there are more Greens elected, unless you start to rein in economic growth, I mean net economic growth, I mean the overall size of the economy, unless you increase renewables and reduce fossil fuel, then we're just not going to be able to be seriously addressing this issue. We're not going to look our children and grandchildren in the face and say we did all we could, because make no mistake, this is the issue that we will be judged on. This is the issue that the politicians of this generation will be judged on, and we in the Greens know where we stand on the issue. It's about system change rather than climate change. We can't address this individually, we have to address it together. So everyone has to take responsibility in their own homes, and, recycling, putting the solar panels on the roof, etc. But we have to pull together and actually change our system, change our economy, transition to an economy which is going to be based in renewables, where we're going to waste far less energy, and where we're not going to be obsessed with growing all the time. And what's this economic growth supposed to be for anymore? There's enough to go round if we just share it out. In a rich country like Britain, there's enough to go round if we just share it. I'd like to see us getting rid of this government and bringing in a government that was actually serious about the energy of the future, which is green, renewable energy, for which we have so much potential here in Norfolk. We should have tidal energy here, as well as, of course, expanding the wind and solar that we have. Tidal energy, by the way, could save the Broads if you put in a tidal barrage in. That's the kind of creative thinking we need to stop dangerous climate change.